Welcome to Talkin SEC. Writer, photographer, and producer Phillip Jordan discusses all the latest in college football in the Southeast with the best analyst around. Now from the southeast corner of Alabama, a state that knows sports, here is Phillip Jordan.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Talking SEC. I'm your host, Phillip Jordan from Last World College Football and 96.9 The Legend in Dothan, Alabama, where I'm the in-studio host and producer. Dothan was football. Got a fun show planned for you guys today. Another audio-only edition. I know you guys missed my beautiful face on the camera, but just another audio edition of Talking SEC. And joining me on the show today, in just a few moments, I'll be joined by Tony Tsoukalas from Bama Central, part of SportsIllustrated.com. We are going to look back at the draft picks where Alabama players went in the draft to talk about some of the undrafted guys that got signed as well. Who stood out, which guys surprised Tony that did not get drafted. So we'll talk about all that, which the Georgia Bulldogs had 15 players drafted this past weekend, which was a record. SEC dominate, and that's one of the other reasons why the SEC is the best conference in college football, because each and every year they have the most players in the NFL draft. But we will talk about that, but we will also kind of recap the spring from Alabama, which is a few weeks old now, and we will look ahead. We'll break down the offense, defense. We'll talk Bryce Young, offensive line, receivers, running backs. We'll break down the defense, which I think is going to be on a whole nother level this upcoming season for Alabama. And we'll just kind of slightly go over the schedule. So a lot of good stuff with Tony Tsoukalas. We'll go about 25 minutes in our conversation talking about the Crimson Tide, the team who I think will win the national championship for the 2022 college football season. But anyways, before we do that, let you guys know you can find me in the podcast. You can find me on social media at PJordanSEC. Talking SEC's on Twitter at Talking SEC Pod. Of course, you can listen to the podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, please follow, rate, and review. Leave a review, and I will read it on a future edition of the show. You can also check us out over on YouTube, either at the Phillip Jordan Sports YouTube channel or the Talking SEC YouTube channel. Just hit the subscribe button, hit that bell for notifications, and please leave a comment on a video. You leave a comment on one of the videos, I will read that too as well on a future podcast. And of course, you can always email me at sports.phillipjordan@gmail.com. Now let's jump into this week's featured guest, Tony Tsoukalas from Bama Central. Everybody joining me this week, we are talking about the Crimson Tide, a team I think is going to win the national championship next year. I'm already calling it. We're in May. That's my prediction. I'm sure anybody out there is going to be mad at me now because I'm thinking the Tide win it all. But joining me, as I do a lot of times when I talk about Alabama, is Tony Tsoukalas. You can check him out over at Bama Central, part of Sports Illustrated over there. And, Tony, it's been a while since we chatted, but I appreciate you jumping on.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on again. I appreciate it. I don't think you have too much of a bold take there, picking Alabama to win the title. I don't know how many people can really disagree with the roster they're bringing back.
Well, when you're an Auburn writer and you pick Alabama to win it all, there's going to be a little pushback.
Sure.
So from that side out, look, I don't know how many times I've been accused of being a closet Alabama fan anyway, so it's all good. It'll come at me again. But you can't deny the success at Alabama with everything they've done. But yeah, I mean, and I want to talk about the upcoming team. You know, obviously the draft was this past weekend, and the Georgia got to shine this year. She's Alabama with the most players from the SEC get drafted, but it was Alabama. Was there any Alabama players that the ones that did get drafted? Was there one that fell, or were you kind of surprised like where they were picked, late, early, anything like that?
Not too surprised. I mean, I think you saw Christian Harris drop a little bit, and then maybe you saw the way that he ended the season. You might have thought that he wouldn't have dropped a little bit, but nothing really surprised me all that much. It kind of went, other than, a few minor drops or rises, I think maybe the fact that, this is a guy that didn't get drafted, but maybe the fact that, Chris Allen didn't get drafted, that, he's a guy that if he doesn't get hurt, I think he's probably could have, worked his way into the third round, second round, maybe with a great season. That injury really cost him. So, I mean, he's, that's someone that was kind of a surprise to me. I figured a team would kind of take a flyer on him late, but it ended up being, better for him because when you're able to choose your team, I think that's better than getting picked, late in the draft. So.
Yeah, kind of in a way I feel bad for a guy like a Brian Robinson because, running back is so devalued now. It feels like, especially when we look at the draft. I mean, you've got to be something special really at the running back position to go the first round. And, now guys are going late second. He goes in the third round. And for me, what he did for Alabama last year, because that second half of the year, he was like the last man standing at running back. He was the running game pretty much for Alabama. And then I feel like, if I was an NFL person, that would be added value, which I think, you got in a good spot. Washington gets a good player there. But with him, it's just, it's kind of the times that we're in with, especially at the pro level, where, running backs are not as valued as they once were.
They definitely are. And then you just got to look at the rest of the market. You had a couple of really good bats in front of him. And he's not a guy that's going to blow you away in terms of, physical attributes. He's a tough runner. He's not the fastest. So he can do a lot of things, but he's not the guy that jumps off the page like a Najee Harris did. So I don't really think that it's too much of a surprise that he went where he went, just because that's about where, as a running back in today's game with his kind of physical attributes, I think that's where he probably should have went. And I think he ended up in a good spot in Washington. I think he could have a nice career. He's not going to be a guy that's going to be the bell cow back of an NFL team, but he can chip in and he gets those hard yards. And honestly, he can be more than just the hard yardage guy. I think that's, the role that if you were to pigeonhole him to one role, that's what you would say. But he's a guy we saw him able to catch out of the backfield. He does a little bit. He's kind of more of a complete back than maybe he gets credit for. So I think he could, carve out a pretty nice little NFL career. Running back lifespan doesn't last that long, but I think he doesn't have a lot of tread on the tires, because he got to wait his turn at Alabama. So I think the future is bright for Brian Robinson, and I don't necessarily think that, he got slided in the draft process all that much.
Yeah, and you look at a guy like John Mechie. I mean, obviously, this would have been I would think he would have been a first-round draft pick if it wasn't for the injury, at the end of the year. I mean, that's just another guy. I mean, especially when you looked at all the receivers that went in the first round. I mean, everybody's looking for them guys. And, I've seen a lot of people talk about now in the NFL, some teams are just trading away the big-name receivers to go get the other guys because they're coming out of college. They're so good, these receivers coming out. But, I don't know about you, but for John Mechie, he's a guy I feel like, if he hadn't got injured, he's probably a first-round guy.
Yeah, he's another guy that, he doesn't have that elite speed that I think a lot of people love at the wide receiver position, but he does everything so solid. And, obviously 96 catches, I think it was last season, so obviously he's doing something right at Alabama. He kind of went higher than you would almost expect after the injury. I think, sometimes when you have those injuries, especially with such a deep receiver class that they had in this draft, you might have expected him to maybe even drift a little bit, maybe go to the third round, just because, teams are looking for question marks and with so many wide receivers. I think the fact that he stayed in the second round is kind of a testament of, like you said, how good he is. Because even with those, red flags, if you want to call them, I think he'll be back by the time training camp starts. So it's not too much of a red flag. But even with those injury concerns, or the fact that he had an injury, he was able to stay in the second round. I think that speaks a lot to his talent. And, I think he's another player that I really like. I like his game. It's not the flashiest game, but I think he's going to do pretty well in the NFL.
Yeah, it's just the whole draft process, especially when after college football season ends. We talk so much how good these guys are. Then it's like, okay, what is wrong with you? The negative, yeah. Every little thing you can find with these guys, you hear about it, which we don't really talk about during the season when we're watching, especially if you're just like a college football person, you see what these guys do on the field. It's so good, but then when the scouting, all the combines, all the pro days, the all-star games, it is kind of an interesting process of what these players have to go through after the season to get ready for the draft.
It's not even just a matter of hey, do they deserve to be at the slot? It comes down to, like we were talking about with both Brian and John, there's both in position groups that had a lot of talent in this year's class. It comes down to tiebreakers, and, if they're below a receiver on the board, then they're not going to go before that receiver if most teams have the other receiver above them. And if there's a tiebreaker or something like an injury, those little tiebreakers right there, they just they can drop your draft status. So it's like we were just saying, that the fact that he was able to hold on to that probably means that he was already so high that those didn't kind of knock him back down a peg.
So looking ahead to the current Alabama players going to the 22 season, which of course I've said it once again, the team I'm my favorite to win it all this upcoming season. And my first thing, actually I'll give you a blank canvas. Just coming out of the spring, what is your big takeaway with this Alabama football team?
They need, maybe I'm a pessimist, but I'll start off with a little bit of a negative. They need to shape up that offensive line, because really, that's the only way I could see this team running into any trouble, is if they cannot figure out that front five. I know it's going to look a little bit different when you get, Emil Ekiyor back from his, fully back from his shoulder injury. You're going to get Darian Dalcoy. He might be the starting center. It might be Seth McLaughlin, but you'll have that battle in the fall. And then obviously you're bringing in Tyler Steen, the Vanderbilt transfer. So the offensive line is going to look different than it did during the spring game. That being said, I think that's the big question mark on this team. And that's the thing you got to look forward, because if they can shape up that offensive line, Alabama truly, I think, is unbeatable. But it could be their Achilles heel if they can't, because as much skill players as you have, you could have all the best receiving core. You could have Jameer Gibbs in the backfield. You could have the Heisman winner and Bryce Young. If you can't block for those guys, it's not going to matter. So I would say that's the biggest takeaway. Is that's the number one thing Alabama's got to worry about is just protecting Bryce Young and allowing him to get the ball to those playmakers. If they can do that, good luck stopping them.
Yeah, that's how I am with that. I feel like, I remember even looking at spring game, and it felt like, Will Anderson was messing up the spring game for the offense.
Yeah, it really was.
In that one, which we'll get to the defense in a second with him. Just with Bryce Young, he wins the Heisman last year. I mean, all-world quarterback college football. I mean, honestly, talented enough to win it again. You know how that goes. It's hard for a guy to win two Heisman trophies. Heisman trophies only been done once. But with him, were you seeing him through the spring and off the last season? Where do you see as a places where maybe Bryce Young could improve, though?
He wants to take more charge in the huddle. It's something that he said, and it was more leadership things, more confidence. I think experience. Sometimes I think he held onto the ball a little bit long, but it's really hard to fault him for that, because so much of his game is what he's able to do and scramble out of plays in the pocket. Will that result to sacks? Probably sometimes. That's another reason why you have to have a good offensive line. It's hard to be an offensive lineman with Bryce Young as your quarterback, because he's doing so much there. You have to block for a long time, and while it translates to big plays, it doesn't make it any easier for those guys up front. So maybe knowing when to do that, knowing when to get rid of the ball. I think, when you're looking at him as a pro prospect, he's definitely not going to have as much time in the NFL. So getting rid of the ball faster, making his reads faster, I think those things kind of come with experience, and that's what I'm expecting Bryce to improve in his game. But, the guy is a magician back there, and he does things that are just absolutely incredible to watch. So I think that there's not much in terms of improvement in his game. Look at his numbers. Even if he wasn't to match those numbers this year, I think he'd probably still have a great year, When you're looking at the Heisman Trophy, he's competing against himself, because, I think people are going to bring up those numbers and how great they were last year, and if he doesn't match those, then he won't win the Heisman. It's so hard to win the Heisman 2 years in a row. He definitely has the talent, and he's definitely one of the best players in college football.
Yeah, I actually, talking about stats, may take a dip there just because they're going to be in better position at the running back position. Last year, it was Brian Robinson and Trey Sanders that took half year, and that was it, because of all the injuries, with McKell and Rodell Williams being hurt. But, you got Trey Sanders coming back. And then Jameer Gibbs, I know a lot of them talk about him, just what he can do, just different things. I know you can use him out of the backfield as a receiver. He's good at kick returns at Georgia Tech, almost as a running back. So Alabama's actually, they're pretty in good shape, at least right now as we're talking to May, going into the season at the running back position compared to what they had to go through last season.
Yeah, all the departure, you had Keelan Robinson leave, and you had 2 season-ending injuries. So, it just really took a hit on your depth. And then you got a guy like Trey Sanders who, is coming off of a serious injury, so it's not like he could really be a bell cow guy either. And so, yeah, that's where you saw DeMoy Kennedy and Christian Leary kind of form as Alabama's, emergency backs last season. I don't think they're not gonna have that problem. I mean, unless they just have another injury crisis. I mean, there's nothing you can do to guard against an injury crisis at one position. But I think they're gonna have one of the best backfields. Jahmyr Gibbs might be the starter, air quotes, but I don't think he's going to get like Najee Harris carries. I think they're going to spread the ball out a lot. I wouldn't be surprised if Jason McClellan becomes, a key part of this offense. We saw him in what he could do before he went down to his injury last year. Trey Sanders is a guy. I'm wondering if Trey Sanders needs limited reps. He's, still. I know it's been a year. I know he's fully recovered or he's getting close to being fully recovered, but that's a serious injury, and I think that being in a system that shares reps like Alabama's will, it will probably end up helping Trey Sanders. But I expect him to be part of the rotation. Roydell Williams is a guy you really can't count out. It's really a stacked running back room. It's hard to imagine that all four of those guys that I mentioned are going to get ample carries, but those things have a way of working their way out. And then, I think Alabama could survive an injury at the running back position because they have that depth. So I think they're in a really great shape there. I think you're going to see things different. So there's not a big back, there's not like a huge guy like Najee Harris was a big back, Derrick Henry, Brian Robinson even was a bigger guy. There's a lot of like smaller, shiftier guys. And so I think you're going to see them be involved in the passing game a lot. Because it's not just Jahmyr Gibbs. I mean, Jahmyr Gibbs is probably the best receiver out of the bunch, but every one of those guys can catch out of the backfield. So I think you're going to be seeing a lot of, screen passes and swing passes, and there's a lot of ways Alabama can attack opposing defenses. And I think, it's going to be a really exciting unit because a lot of those guys are really big play potential guys. I think, I don't know how it's going to shape out, but I'm pretty excited to see, what it will look like.
Yeah, in their loaded position, and I'll just say just because I'm from the Dothan, Alabama area, and that's where I come from. So a lot of people down here are hoping to see little glimpses of Emmanuel Henderson, who is a Geneva County product from down here too, as well.
Exactly. Yeah, he's exactly the kind of guy I was talking about too. I mean, he could play wide receiver if they wanted to. He's actually on the bigger side, but he's so lean. He's almost like has that receiver body. I'm interested to see like what he turns into. I mean, I could see him being like a TJ Yeldon type. Is that fair?
I can see that.
Yeah.
I mean, because I do cover high school football a little bit down here. Do a high school football podcast, covering stuff down here, just watching highlights and just when you see his body build. I mean, and I didn't really think about it. TJ said it, but I do see a little TJ Yeldon there. Yeah,
I think that might be a fair comparison. I do think that especially coming in the fall, he's a guy that's going to have to wait his turn, and that's fine. He's a talented kid. If he's patient with it, he'll get his opportunity. But I just don't see him getting too many reps this season, unless there's a huge injury thing. But he's a guy that if the depth goes down at receiver, he could easily play there. If they need him to stay at running back, I think running back probably the position I'd start him out at. But I think he makes a heck of a receiver as well.
Speaking of receivers, obviously we talked about John Minchie and Jameson Williams, off to the NFL. Slade Bolton too. I mean, he was a reliable, dependable receiver for them as well. Jermaine Burton comes in from Georgia. You got Tyler Harrell coming in from Louisville. Alabama really going into the transfer portal here with receiver, other positions too. Who from spring, and I know Harrell came in after spring, but who was the standout receiver for them? Maybe potential could step up to be that number one guy for Bryce Young.
Oh, I fully expect the number one receiver to be Jermaine Burton. Just seems to build a good connection with Bryce Young this spring. I could see him being a John Mechie type. I personally think he could be a little bit better than John Mechie, and I think, if John Mechie had 96 receptions, I think Burton can kind of match that. I think he also brings a little bit more of a big play threat. He's not the speed of Tyler Harrell, who's going to be the real home run hitter in that receiving core. But I think that Burton's going to do really well. And I think having Tyler Harrell there is going to open some stuff up for him. So I'm expecting him to have a huge day. I came out with, reporting this on a Tuesday, I came out with, my Alabama players that could go in the first round or early round selections, and I put Jermaine Burton as a projected first rounder. I truly believe that Alabama has a way of developing wide receivers, and I think that he is going to be – he's a kind of a hidden gem talent. He should have done more at Georgia. They should have used him a little bit more effectively in Georgia because I think he's a really great receiver, and I expect him to be in the NFL next season.
Well, when you're Georgia and you got 500 tight ends, you're going to throw out there. I can see my receiver.
Yeah. Brock Bowers is a heck of a guy as well.
Yeah, and you got Gilbert there, and you got Darnell Washington. They got another guy. I'm blanking on his name right now. He plays well in their spring game. So if I'm a receiver, I'm like, I don't know if I want to go to Georgia because like the tight end is going to be the key to the passing game over there the next 2 or 3 years. Oh, on Alabama defense, and of course, starts with Will Anderson. I mean, this is a guy, and I told somebody I had on the pod a couple weeks ago, I said, it's almost a shame he has to play another year of college. Alabama fans don't get mad at me for saying that. I'm just saying that his talent, I mean, he would be he would probably be the first pick in the draft. He could have came out this year. Oh, with him and just everybody else on his defense, Dallas Turner at linebacker, Henry To'oTo'o at linebacker, up front with Tim Smith, Brian Young, DJ Dale, Eli. I mean, I know he's in the news for bad reasons, but Eli Ricks in the secondary, all the other safeties, battle. I mean, there's so many players on this defense. I mean, it lose a lot on that side of the ball. I'm just kind of wondering, could this be one of the better defenses Alabama's had in recent years, and could it stack up against some of Nick Saban's best when you just look at the talent that's going to be on the field for that side of the ball?
It really is, and especially in the front seven, I think it's just absolutely insane. Look, you've got Will Anderson, who I think if you put him in the NFL right now, he'd be one of the better pass rushers in the NFL right now. Obviously, it would take us some time to learn as a rookie, but I think, from a skill standpoint and an athleticism standpoint, he would be one of the best in the NFL. So you've got, not only just an NFL edge rusher, but a good NFL edge rusher, and then Dallas Turner, I think, could be easily another first-round pick on the other side. You even got a guy like Chris Broswell, who they could bring in on special pass rushing sets, and he's a guy that's another huge 5-star edge rusher. Henry To'oTo'o led the team in tackles. Now, he had a mixed bag of a season last year, and he needs to show more consistency, but on his day, he can be a top inside linebacker. And then, we saw in the spring, we saw Jamil Burroughs get some of that inside pressure that you were kind of wondering, can Alabama have that Phil Mathis, that Christian Barmore, that inside guy? Maybe that's Jamil Burroughs, maybe that's Tim Smith, but I think that we're going to probably see that develop, and it should be aided by the amount of pressure they're going to generate on the edge. And then let's move on to the secondary. There's a little bit more question marks in that area, but I think, with a guy like Khalid McKinstry returning, whether it's Eli Ricks or Tyree Jackson, I think most people expect Eli Ricks, but, I wouldn't count out Tyree Jackson to carve out a role. I think those are talented cornerback options. The safeties coming back are Jordan Battle and DeMarco Hellams, who were solid last year, and I think they're going to continue to be solid. And then here's the name, too, in the secondary that I think is going to become a household name in college football is Brian Brandt. That guy is absolutely insane. He's probably one of the best tacklers on the team. He actually had the highest the highest Pro Football Focus tackling grade on the team, above Anderson, above all those people. He's a hard hitter. He can cover. He led the team in pass deflections last year. So I like him in that slot role at the star position. So I think this could be one of the best defenses Nick Saban's put together. Obviously, again, barring injuries, you got to see how it all shakes out. But talent-wise, there's not a lot of holes in this defense, and it could truly be, they're saying 2016, you want to say that, you want to say, 2011, whatever. I think it could be one of those, historic defenses, kind of similar maybe to the Georgia defense last year.
Yeah, there's so many guys. I just named all these guys I named off. How many guys you're going to see a lot of them, if not all of them, playing in the National Football League in the next couple of years. And just they're loaded on that side of the ball. I'd feel bad for any of the offenses going against Alabama this year. This season, looking at their schedule, and I was looking over that, they open with Utah State, they go to Texas State. A couple games, I want to get your take. They go to Arkansas the start of October. Obviously, that team has a lot of momentum. You're at Arkansas. The Ole Miss game late. That's interesting because usually Alabama plays them early, I think, but they're playing them late in the year. Just when you think about Alabama's schedule, is there any potential matchups where you say, okay, this could be a game Alabama needs to pay attention to, or especially Alabama fans, it could be a little bit tougher than maybe they may think going, as we talk here in May?
I don't have the schedule right in front of me, but I think Arkansas is a team that I would take a watch for. I mean, they're a team that improved with some transfers this year. That's a game where maybe Alabama wouldn't, take it as seriously. Arkansas played them pretty tough last year. The game's going to be in Fayetteville. It's always that kind of game, though, right? It's never it's never the one that you think. So I think maybe it's thinking out of the box a little bit. That's why I pick Arkansas, because like you could say Texas A&M, but I think Alabama's going to be so dialed in for that game, and they're usually dialed in for Ole Miss. With I'm sure something will happen that week with Lane Kiffin, and there'll be a storyline. I'll probably get him kind of rearing to go. So I mean those are going to be tough games, in terms of talent. But I think that a sleeping pick would really be Arkansas, because I think that team's going to probably punch above its weight. And the game's in Fayetteville. Everyone talks about that Tennessee streak, but Alabama also has a huge streak over Arkansas. I'm sure that they'd want to end that. They almost have a few times. I mean, Arkansas has played Alabama some ugly games, and so I'm not saying that I'm picking Arkansas to win, but that is a game that I wouldn't necessarily sleep on.
Yeah, that's the reason why I didn't even bring up A&M, because while I think A&M is going to be really good, one of the better teams in the conference, also know they're going to have Alabama that weekend to defend Tuscaloosa and beating Nick Saban 2 years in a row. I mean, it's just, you just don't see it. I mean, it's just, he's going to have their team ready that week. And I was afraid to mention Tennessee. I've learned my lesson with them. Every time the last few head coaches that have got hype around the program going into the, I got to see you guys be consistent. Because usually when you had a good year at Tennessee, or a year that shows some forward progress, the next year you take 2 steps backwards. So at Auburn, I know this is Brian Harsin, which that's a different story with Brian Harsin, what's going on at Auburn, the future with that. But under Gus Malzahn and even Gene Chizik, except for the Cam Newton year, they have not fared well in Tuscaloosa. They give Alabama everything they want in Jordan Hare. When they go to Bryant Denny, it's a different story. So the Ole Miss one is the one that really just sticks out to me, especially just being that late in the season compared to where I believe they usually play early in the year. So.
And I can definitely see that. I mean, Ole Miss is going to, I love Lane Kiffin, and I love his ability to dial up plays against, Alabama. He knows Nick Saban. Didn't necessarily work out for him last year, but he talk about somebody that definitely wants to win a game. I think he definitely wants to get one over on Nick Saban. So maybe he has some extra stuff, planned, especially with it being in Oxford. That's going to be a dangerous game.
Yeah, I don't have the Ole Miss schedule in front of me, but I'm actually fearful for them to, if he does ever knock off Alabama, what will the team's capabilities be the next week? Anyways, let's see what Ole Miss. I have a feeling they would have a letdown if they ever do knock off Alabama, whoever they play next on that one. I mean, Lane Kiffin will not let anybody hear the end of it if he does ever beat Nick Saban either. But anyways, I told you I was going to keep you 20. I think I kept you 30 here on the show today, Tony. Appreciate the time. It was fun talking Alabama. I'm sure I'll try to catch up with you between now and the start of the season, and I'm sure we'll chat during the season as well. But I always appreciate you taking time to come on the show. Great Alabama insight and what's going on with the Crimson Tide. And if the listeners want to follow you online, where can they find you and all the work you're doing over at Bama Central?
Yeah, like you said, the site's Bama Central, and we cover everything Alabama, man. Football, recruiting, baseball, softball, everything, basketball, of course, so definitely give us a follow over there. You can follow me on Twitter at Tony_Tsoukalas, and my last name is spelled Tsoukalas.
All right, sounds good, Tony. Anyways, appreciate the time, and I look forward to talking to you again sometime down the road.
Of course, man. Look forward to it.
All right, everybody, that's going to do it for this week's edition of Talking SEC. Hope you enjoyed breakdown of Alabama. Now, I will let you guys know there will not be a podcast next week. I am going to be traveling next week for my day job, so I will not be doing a podcast next week. But the following week, we'll pick back up, breaking down and previewing teams as we get closer and closer to the 2022 SEC college football season. I know people are saying, Phillip, it is May. Why do you say closer and closer? Look, when you map these things out, doing these breakdowns once a week, it kind of equals up. Like I said last week, we'll have some interruptions with some other stuff between here and there. But, it's not as far off as you think it is, because once we hit June and then July hits and media days hit, there's a lot of cool stuff coming in. The season's not too far away. Preview magazines will be coming out here pretty soon. So keep an eye out on all the cool breakdowns we're going to be doing here on the podcast. But like I said, there will not be one next week. You can follow me on social media, P Jordan SEC. The podcast is on Twitter as well at Talking SEC Pod. You can listen to the podcast on all your favorite podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, just wherever you get your podcasts. Talking SEC is there. On YouTube as well, either on the Phillip Jordan Sports YouTube channel or the Talking SEC YouTube channel. And you can always email me at sports.philipjordan@gmail.com. I hope everybody has a great week. Be about a week and a half before you hear from me again. But until next time, bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Talkin' SEC. Follow Phillip on social media at PJordanSEC and the show at Talkin' SEC Pod. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcast or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you next time when we're talking SEC.